Mankind likes to believe that there are no monsters, that we have always ruled the world. It is not so. Faith is a hard thing when you're a god. Gwydion trudged up the old dirt road. The dark of a forest surrounded it, dimly illuminated by just a sliver of the moon. He imagined the area had been beautiful once, natural, soothing. Now it looked sinister, like there were nightmares hiding behind every tree. Perhaps there were. Gwydion wondered if it might have been smarter to drive. He'd parked his car a few miles back, traveling on foot in an effort to be stealthy. Normally he would drive up anyway, trusting in his power to keep himself hidden. Not this time. Gwydion was tall and dressed all in black. Black pants, black boots, a black t-shirt with an alien skull and crossbones on the chest. Below the crossbones were the words, "Space Pirates, give me your booty, in space." A black leather trench coat stirred slightly in the breeze. Gwydion was more than bulky, with sharp gray eyes and a ponytail of silky blonde hair. The woods were silent, eerily so. There was no rustlings of squirrels or rabbits in the brush, no birds, no crickets, nothing but the wind in the trees and the whispers. The whispers were the reason Gwydion had chosen not to drive. They were quiet, subtle, everywhere. They pressed in around him, soft enough that he could almost make out the words if he listened a little harder. Gwydion did no such thing. That way lies madness, even for him. The whispers grew louder the closer Gwydion came to the source. Eventually he saw it, an old church, peeling white paint, a broken cross leaning on a steeple. It was old. It had probably been charming once, a place of faith and peace and worship, blessed with the touch of the divine. Now it was none of those things. A terrible light was coming out of the windows and a pair of holes in the roof. The light was a color mortal eyes had never seen, must never see, the color of madness. It didn't make any sense. That wasn't how light was supposed to work. If the whispers had been proof enough, the light made it certain. There was a power from outside of reality in that church. Something that could ignore physics and twist the world beyond reason. Vines crept up the walls, but they were dead, blackened. So was the grass. The closest trees had withered in on themselves, twisting into nightmare shapes. They were dead now, too. Cars were parked all over the dead lawn of the church. A lot of cars. Gwydion sighed. He was late. Too late. He had been hoping to find cultists or similar ilk, foolish mortals playing with forces they didn't understand. The world was full of such groups, and they were mostly harmless. Well, not harmless, but not capable of threatening humanity so much that Gwydion had to intervene. As for the dangerous few that could, Gwydion made a point of finding and killing them, preferably before they could summon anything from outside. It was work he enjoyed. Gwydion had been known as a trickster and a magician, but he was a warrior too. It was one of the reasons he'd been chosen to stay. The other reason was that most of his pantheon didn't like him. Gwydion didn't blame them. He hadn't been a good person in the old days. Gwydion took a moment to check his weapons. 2 pistols, a shotgun, 2 swords. One of the swords Gwydion had made himself. The other used to belong to Freyr. Gwydion had stolen it from Jotun. He had also had a couple of knives and a fair amount of extra ammunition. And his magic, of course. Speaking of magic, he was getting close to the church. It was time for a little something extra. Gwydion called upon his power. His magic could do many things, but his bread and butter was illusion. He cast one now. Gwydion disappeared. He was invisible, save for his shadow. His footsteps made no sound. Gwydion walked up to the door of the church. The door was closed. Gwydion cast another working before he opened it. Anyone watching wouldn't see or hear the door being opened. Gwydion drew his pistol and pushed open the door. The first thing he saw was an orb resting on an altar in the back of the church. The orb was about the size of a bowling ball. It was perfectly smooth. It glowed with a light that should not be seen. The glowing orb seized Gwydion's attention. It tried to pull him in, force him to gaze into its depths. It took all the power of his disciplined mind to tear his gaze away. Gwydion's wandering gaze fell on a different problem. The room was full of people, at least 50 of them. Half of them were dead. The other half... Gwydion saw one man eating his own fingers. A little old lady laughed as she used her hands and a pocket knife to remove the skin from her face. A naked man had broken some of the old pews into pieces and set them on fire. He was sitting in the fire. He was naked. He was also weeping. Everywhere Gwydion looked, he saw a different horror. People were fornicating and torturing and eating each other. The church had once been a holy place, a place of comfort and worship. Now, no trace of divine presence could be found. Instead, it was a place of madness. Gwydion sent a prayer up to Yahweh. More a message than a prayer, really. Gods didn't generally worship each other. It was one of the things that made faith so hard to come by. He asked the Christian God to take in these damned souls and give them comfort. He didn't get an answer, but he was sure the Trinity had heard. Outsiders were dangerous for a lot of reasons, but the biggest was the madness they bring. Even a brief exposure could devastate the mind of a mortal. He'd heard that's what happened to Lovecraft, and the reason so many of the author's stories reflected beings he should not have known about. These people had taken a lot more than a brief exposure. No amount of time or therapy would help them. Gwydion didn't know if there were cultists among them or if the orb from outside had found a way in on its own and called them here. It didn't matter now. There was nothing Gwydion could do to save them. Their minds were broken, shattered by the touch of the outside. Gwydion drew his second pistol. He would kill them quickly. It was all he could do for them. He took aim. The madman eating his fingers looked up. He looked Gwydion in the eye. He pointed with his fingerless hand and let out a scream. Gwydion shot him. The gun was silent. Gwydion's spell meant he made no sound. The man dropped with a hole in his skull. It was too late. All the other people in the room looked up, looked at him. It shouldn't have been possible. Gwydion was invisible, but the people saw him anyway. Maybe it was the madness. Insanity could make you see things that weren't there, but it could also let you see things that are hidden. Or maybe it was the orb's doing. Maybe the color that shouldn't be seen was cutting through his spell. Either way, the madmen in the church all let out a wail. Some of them rushed him. Gwydion opened fire. He'd killed 3 people before he'd noticed some of the others reaching for things. No, reaching for guns. Not good. Stories and TV shows made gods out to be more powerful than they really were. Gwydion was stronger and faster and tougher than a mortal, but he wasn't invincible. Bullets would kill him just as easily as they killed everyone else. Gunpowder was the main reason humans had come to dominate the planet. There were things that were immune, but not many. You'd be surprised how many things a bullet could kill. Gwydion ran. The sound of gunshots chased him as he bolted out onto the lawn. He needed cover. In the movies, you could hide behind a table or a couch or a wall, but in real life, that was a quick way to die. Furniture wouldn't stop a bullet, and walls don't do much better unless they were stone or brick. The walls of the old church were plain wood, no help at all. Gwydion leapt over the hood of a pickup on the lawn. It was a beat-up old white Chevy. It wouldn't stop a bullet either. Gwydion didn't stop, but he ducked low, hoping to break the line of sight. He holstered one of his pistols and drew out the sword of Freyr. Freyr's sword had a proper name, but Gwydion didn't know what it was. It was a beautifully crafted longsword in the Viking style, with a leather-bound hilt and 3-foot blade lined with runes. The sword was supernaturally sharp and extremely durable, but it wasn't what made it special. Most enchanted swords were sharp and tough. What made it special was the enchantment Freyr had given it. The sword of Freyr would fight on its own. He tossed the sword up in the air as he ran. The sword floated for a moment, then turned and launched itself at one of the madmen spilling out of the church. It stabbed him in the heart, then jerked itself out of his chest and lopped off the head of an old lady with no face. Gwydion kept running, dodging around or under cars and staying out of sight as best he could. He made it to the tree line and kept going. The trees close to the church were so withered and rotten that he wasn't sure they'd stop a bullet. He was 30 feet into the woods before he found a living tree of decent size. He ducked behind it. He could hear screams and gibbering and gunfire. Gwydion leaned around the tree carefully, showing as little of his head as he could. The floating sword had killed 6 people, but there were 23 left. 7 of them had guns. All of them were racing in Gwydion's direction. Gwydion took aim with his pistol. Decades of training and practice took over. The madmen were shooting at him, but he ignored the fear telling him to hide behind the tree. He ignored the urge to hurry his shots. He lined up the first target in his sights. He squeezed the trigger. The gun jumped in his hand. There was no sound, but a skinless man with a rifle fell. Gwydion went for a naked lady with a shotgun next. The first shot hit her center mass, but she didn't stop. Gwydion shot her in the head. Something slammed into Gwydion's upper arm. The arm went numb. Damn it, he'd been shot. The pain would kick in a few seconds. Gwydion hated being shot. It hurt like a son of a bitch. Gwydion wanted to curse, but he couldn't spare the time. He lined up another shot and dropped a one-armed man with a handgun. Killing everyone with a gun didn't take long, maybe 10 seconds. By the time he'd finished, there were only 6 people running towards him. None of them had the presence of mind to turn back and pick up a gun. A 7th person was on the ground. The sword of Freyr was lodged in his chest, and he was holding it there with both hands. The man was laughing. Gwydion noticed he didn't have eyes anymore. Gwydion lowered the pistol in his right hand. His arm was screaming at him, and he was almost out of bullets. He drew his second pistol with his left and stepped out from the tree. He dropped the remaining people. As the last of them fell, Gwydion saw a shape step out from the doorway of the church. A figure was pointing a rifle at him. Gwydion let off a shot as he tried to duck back behind the tree. He was fast, but he wasn't fast enough. The rifle boomed. Something smacked into his side just below the ribcage. Now Gwydion did curse. A quick inspection told him the bullet had gone right through him. The holes were half an inch under his lowest rib. Gwydion grimaced. He was pretty sure there was a hole in his liver now. Gwydion cast an illusion. A copy of himself leaned out from behind the tree. No gunshot came. Damn it. Gwydion's illusions were usually his best weapon. Enemies that could see through them were a real problem, especially when those enemies were crazy people with rifles that had a bead on him. Gwydion considered his options. He could try to shoot the rifleman, but he didn't like his odds. The man might still be standing in the doorway. But if he had any working brain matter left, he would have repositioned. He might have taken cover behind the Chevy, putting the engine block between himself and Gwydion's gun. He might have just moved to the side, or he might be running towards Gwydion right now. Gwydion figured it would take him a full second to locate the man and snap off a shot. Too slow. If the rifleman wasn't running or doing something crazy, he could hit Gwydion in half that time. There was no help for it. Gwydion would have to take his chances. The Lord of Illusion whipped out the left side of the tree. He aimed, fired, and got back into cover. The whine of a bullet whizzed past his ear. Gwydion let out a relieved sigh, which was a mistake. He had a hole in his liver. Breathing hurt. Breathing deeply hurt worse. Gwydion gritted his teeth. He took some comfort in the knowledge his shot had been good. He'd seen the rifleman leaning over the hood of the white Chevy, using one hand like a tripod to hold his gun. He'd seen him too late, but that was all right. Gwydion had been aiming at someone else. The madman with the sword of Freyr in his chest was dead now. The sword could take care of the rifleman for him. Gwydion cast another illusion. This one was a mirror. The mirror appeared next to the tree. It gave Gwydion a clear view of the sword of Freyr beheading the rifleman. Gwydion frowned at the mirror, then cursed again. Why didn't you think to use that 5 seconds ago? The sword of Freyr hovered for a moment, then went into the church. Gwydion reloaded his pistols before he left the cover of the tree. He thought about taking a moment to pull out his first aid kit, but he couldn't spare the time. The whispers were still crawling around in the back of his brain. He needed to finish this as quick as he could. Gwydion had taken 3 steps towards the church when the front of the building exploded. A thing burst into view. It was warped and twisted. Its body was a mass of eyes and tentacles and teeth. The body shifted and morphed, eyes and mouths flowing like water across the thing. The colors of the creature shifted as well, but the color that must not be seen was dominant. An outsider. Gwydion's mouth went dry. Before anything else could happen, Gwydion cast another spell. Instead of just muting himself, he spread a dome of silence 100 feet wide. It was a necessary precaution. No 2 outsiders were exactly alike, but most of them used sound as a weapon. They could give off a keening sound that shattered sanity or stone. They could use low-frequency sounds to paralyze or liquefy organs. Where had it come from? How would Gwydion miss such a creature? It was as big as a car. Did the orb summon it, maybe? Gwydion guessed it didn't matter. The good news was the creature was small for its kind. It was probably a lesser servant come to open the way for something bigger. The better news was that muting all sound stopped the whispers that had been gnawing at Gwydion's soul. He should have done that earlier. The sword of Freyr followed the creature out of the church. It sliced off a tentacle, then shot into the servant's body like an arrow. The creature writhed. It would be howling if Gwydion's magic hadn't silenced it. Gwydion emptied his pistols into the thing. He knew bullets wouldn't get the job done, but they might slow it down a little. When the pistols were empty, he pulled out a pump-action shotgun. The servant ignored the gunfire. It was busy pulling the sword of Freyr out of itself. The sword struggled, but the outsider wrapped a tentacle around the hilt. It pulled the sword out and kept a tight grip. Dozens of eyes shifted to stare down at Gwydion. Gwydion unloaded the shotgun on it. The outsider launched itself at him, using its tentacles like the legs of a spider. Gwydion drew his other sword. Gwydion was not a god of forging. By divine standards, he was barely mediocre. It had taken several centuries and hundreds of failures to make and enchant the sword in his hand. It was a double-edged longsword with a 2-handed hilt. It had been forged from a fallen star, a meteorite. Gwydion had used every tool and trick at his disposal to strengthen the heavenly iron, and spent a full decade layering it with enchantments. The end result wasn't as good as he wanted, but he didn't think he could make something better. Gwydion would never share the true name of his sword. He just called it Nameless. Nameless looked like a basic longsword with no embellishments. Like any good magic sword, it was sharp enough to fell a tree in one swing, and much stronger than steel. The sword of Freyr had been forged to kill giants. Nameless had been made to kill outsiders. Gwydion took Nameless in a 2-handed grip. He let his magic flow into the blade. The sword got bigger. The blade lengthened and thickened until it was 9 feet long. It was an impractical ability. The other gods would laugh at him if they saw. Tripling the size of the blade made the sword heavy and screwed up the balance. It was very hard to wield. Any decent warrior would annihilate anyone stupid enough to use a sword like that. Outsiders were not warriors. They didn't fight like people. Gwydion charged, careful to keep Nameless so low it wouldn't snag on any tree branches. The servant reached him before he could clear the tree line. Tentacles lashed out. Gwydion had been hoping the outsider would try to stab him with the sword of Freyr, but this one wasn't that stupid. It kept Freyr's blade wrapped tight and out of reach. Gwydion swept Nameless in a wide arc. The blade severed 6 tentacles and the trunk of a withered tree. More tentacles burst out of the creature. Gwydion heaved the sword around and sliced those too. The tree Gwydion had cut fell on the outsider. The tree wouldn't hurt the thing. Outsiders warped reality around them. Bullets and blunt force never did much damage as they should. Swords and spears didn't do much better, magic or not. That was why Gwydion had made Nameless in the first place. The sword reinforced reality around it. The effect only extended an inch from the blade itself, but it was enough. Outsiders couldn't ignore Nameless. They couldn't make it pass through them without harm, or warp the blade. or any of the other nasty things that made them so hard to kill. When Nameless cut them, they stayed cut. The falling tree wouldn't hurt the outsider, but it did distract the thing. Tentacles whipped up to grab it, probably so it could throw the tree at Gwydion. Gwydion didn't give it the chance. He raised the sword high, then brought it down with all the force and magic he could muster. Nameless sliced through the falling tree, the raised tentacles, and the body of the creature. The outsider recoiled. The two halves of the withered tree slammed into the top of it. Gwydion heaved the blade out of the servant, then brought it around for a horizontal slash. His arm and his side were killing him. He was losing a lot of blood. It didn't matter. Gwydion kept cutting the creature until it stopped moving. Then he slashed it until its body stopped doing that weird shifting thing outsiders always do. It took a minute, but when Gwydion was done, the outsider was nothing but a mass of gross chunks. The black ichor that served as its blood was everywhere. Gwydion pulled a small towel and a water bottle out of his trench coat pockets. He used them to wash the gunk off his face and hands. Corrosive, nasty stuff. Gwydion retrieved the sword of Freyr and cleaned it off before returning it to its sheath. He tried to clean Nameless too, but he ran out of water and most of the towel dissolved before he could finish. Gwydion supposed it was just as well. He wasn't ready to sheath his sword anyway. Gwydion started towards the church. He swayed. He was dizzy. Too much exertion and too much blood loss. A mortal would have passed out already, or died. Gwydion pulled the little first aid kit off the back of his belt. He bandaged his wounds as best he could. It wasn't perfect, but it should slow the bleeding at least. He needed to finish this quick and get out of here. He wasn't good at healing magic, and he didn't dare try it in this tainted place. He found the orb still sitting on the altar, still glowing its sickening light. Gwydion pulled a pair of sunglasses out of his jacket. They didn't help much. Getting rid of the orb would be a pain in the ass. If Gwydion smashed it, he'd just end up with a bunch of little tainted shards, just as dangerous and a lot harder to keep track of. Burying it wouldn't work. It would call more mortals until it got dug up. He could try launching it into space, but Gwydion doubted he could generate enough force to get it out of Earth's gravity well. It would just fall back down. That left a banishing spell. Send the thing back to outside reality. It was a dangerous ritual, and Gwydion was already feeling weak. He gritted his teeth and started carving circles and runes into the floor of the church. The ritual took most of an hour. Gwydion felt half dead by the time the rift opened under the orb. To his immense frustration, the orb didn't fall into the rift. It floated above it instead. Gwydion didn't waste time swearing. He wasn't dumb enough to step into the circle he'd carved, but he didn't have to. He made Nameless big again and smacked the orb with the flat of the blade hard. The orb was jolted into the rift. Gwydion called on his power, forcing the rift closed as fast as he could. He didn't want the orb to come back out, or something worse than the orb. Gwydion had had that happen once. He still had nightmares sometimes. With the orb gone, Gwydion dropped his mute spell. Silence. No whispers. Good. He just had to do one more thing, and then he could leave. Gwydion walked out of the church. He called his magic again. He started setting things on fire.